In your science notebook, in the table of contents, you're going to write parts of an ecosystem, page 19 and 20. Then you're going to turn to page 19, find the first page for parts of an ecosystem that looks like this, and glue it onto page 19. Make sure you also write page 19 on there. Remember, we have to number our pages. Then on page 20, you're going to find the second part to parts of an ecosystem and glue that down to page 20. Now the rest of the video will go over the answers to pages 19 and 20 as we look at a forest ecosystem. So here you see a forest ecosystem, and you're going to use this forest ecosystem to answer the questions on page 19 and 20 in your science notebook. So the first thing it asks us to do is label some biotic or living things and some abiotic or non-living things of this ecosystem. So let's talk biotic first. What do you see in this ecosystem that's living? Well, I bet you would tell me a deer, a snake, a rabbit, a raccoon, a fox, a bear, a hawk. Yes, all of those things are living. The shrubs, these little shrubs right here, are also living. This tree is also living. Okay, so make sure, don't list just the animals, list some shrubs and trees or plants as well. You don't have to list every living thing that's in this picture. I don't think you have enough room to list every living thing. I would say list at least 5 living things or 5 biotic things from this ecosystem on your journal page 19. I just told you a lot more than 5. I'm just asking you to list 5. Now, abiotic, non-living things in this ecosystem. Still very important to the ecosystem. Still have to be in the ecosystem in order for the living things to survive, but they're not alive. So one of the non-living things or abiotic things in this ecosystem is the sun. The sun is not alive, but it's important to this ecosystem. Water. Water is not alive, but it's important to this ecosystem. Without this water, these plants and these animals are going to die. You can't see the other 2 non-living things in this ecosystem, but they would be oxygen. The air that we breathe is important. It's a non-living thing in the ecosystem. And finally, clouds. There could be clouds in the sky. You can't see them because the background of this picture happens to be white. So we listed the sun, water, oxygen, and clouds as non-living things found in this ecosystem. There could be other non-living things in ecosystems like rocks. Rocks are not alive, but I don't see any rocks in this picture. Maybe there's some under the water, not real sure. All right, on page 19, number 2 says the transfer of energy through an ecosystem can be shown by creating a food chain. The energy to begin every food chain must come from the blank. All energy sources are traced back to one thing, and that is the sun. The sun is the energy source for all food chains. It's the energy source for all life on Earth. So make sure you write that on number 2. Number 3 asks you to come up with 2 possible food chains found in this ecosystem. There's a bunch of different possible answers, but both of your food chains should start with what? Both of your food chains should start with the sun. We just did that on number 2. All energy sources go back to the sun. So both of your food chains should start with the sun. All right, the sun provides energy to what? Let's say this grass. So sun provides energy to the grass. And then this grass provides energy to the deer. So we have a food chain that goes sun, grass, deer. So now we need another food chain for our ecosystem. It's going to start with sun. Well, this time instead of sun, grass, maybe it's sun and then the shrub, which is still a type of grass. And then what's going to eat the shrubs? The rabbit. Ooh, this one has an extra layer. Instead of just having 3 parts of our food chain, this second one has 4 parts. So sun, shrub, rabbit. What would eat the rabbit? Maybe a fox. Is that the only possible thing that would eat that rabbit? No. All right, moving on to number 4 on page 20 of your science notebook. All blank are blank. They use the sun's energy to make their own food. You should recall this from last week. What is it that makes their own food using the sun's energy? Plants. So all plants are producers. They use the sun's energy to make their own food. They don't have to go out and eat anything. They use the energy directly from the sun. Animals cannot create their own food and must find other organisms to eat to gain energy, so they are consumers. The deer, the rabbit, the squirrel, the raccoon, the fox, the bear, all of the animals are consumers. They have to eat. They do not make their own food. Animals that eat plants, like this rabbit eats plants, this mouse eats plants, this deer eats plants. Animals that eat plants are called primary consumers because primary, if you think, means like first. And they are the first consumer, the primary consumer in the food chain. Animals that eat other animals, like this hawk, this fox, or this bear, those are considered secondary consumers because they eat other animals. So they're not the first in the food chain, they're the second or third or so on in the food chain. Some organisms called blank break down dead plant and animal materials. Examples are earthworms and mushrooms. Show an example of where one of these may be found in a food chain. So organisms that break down dead plants and animals are called decomposers. And you see some mushrooms here in this forest ecosystem. Those mushrooms are decomposers. They break down dead plants and animals and return the nutrients to the earth. If this is an earthworm, that's also a decomposer, but that could also be a snake. I'm not really sure what that is. So they want us to create another food chain and show where a decomposer would be. So all food chains start with what? The sun. So the first thing we're going to put in our food chain is the sun. Now these food chains I'm doing are just examples. You could definitely come up with your own. The sun gives its energy to what? Some sort of producer, so it's got to be a plant. So I'm going to go with grass. The sun gives its energy to the grass. What eats the grass? Let's say this little mouse right here. The mouse eats the grass. What eats this little mouse? Let's say this hawk up here swoops down and gets him. So the mouse is a primary consumer because he eats the grass, he eats the producer. The hawk is a secondary consumer because he eats the mouse or another animal. What happens when this hawk dies? He starts to rot. Well, the decomposer or the mushroom is what would break down his living carcass or his dying carcass. So mushroom would come last in our food chain. Make sure you have all the questions on page 19 and 20 in your science notebook answered.